Welcome to the second Saturday layout tour of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. And today we're going to have a layout tour by Chuck Lee from Puyallup, Washington.
My name's Chuck Lee. I live down in Puyallup, as Bert mentioned. I've been up here about 8 years. I used to live in Houston, Texas before that, and kind of all around the world, but I'll get into that here. Let me share my screen here to get started. So I started the Colorado Front Range Railroad, like I said, about 8 years when I moved to this house. This is my third iteration of this layout. So I've had a number of things I've learned over the years, some things I've improved on, some things have possibly gotten worse, but here we go. A little bit about me. I was born in Denver, Colorado. I moved a lot as growing up. I've never lived in a house longer than 4 years at a time until I moved up here. A lot of layouts that we built and a lot of layouts we tore down. Never really got to scenery on a lot of them. So a lot of plywood Pacifics. I grew up all over the world. I've lived in Scotland, Australia, and Venezuela. But the nice thing is trains was always a connection wherever we moved. So we belonged to a train club in Scotland. We belonged to a train club in Australia. So it was a nice way to get to know people. So that's why one of the things I've always liked about the hobby is it's an easy connection to make with people. So, um, what got me into trains was my dad. So he grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, right next to the Union Pacific Main Line in the times when they were still running their turbines, and so he grew up loving that, and then he got me hooked on it at a young age. So, I mean, the photo here, that's me as a baby with my dad. I was 3 months old in that photo. So I've been doing trains for close to 38 years. So if you count when I was even a baby, because my dad got me my first train when I was 6 months old. So I've been doing it for a long time, really enjoy it. The only thing is I did break my dad's heart when I told him I didn't want to model Union Pacific and I wanted to model Rio Grande. So he was not overly happy about that, but it is what it is. So what is the Colorado Front Range Railroad? Well, it's a joint venture between the Rio Grande and the Burlington Northern. So in the 1980s. So again, that's kind of when I grew up. I've lived in Denver 3 separate times, and Golden was always kind of my hometown when we lived in Denver. So basically, what my railroad is, it's a proto-lanced recreation of the Colorado and Southern Line, which became BN between Denver and Golden. So the reason I say it's proto-lanced is a lot of the industries on my layout are actually based off of real industries, but the track work is not necessarily matching the prototype. I do have a couple areas that do match it pretty closely, but other areas are completely freelanced. So, but the primary purpose of my layout is to serve the Coors Brewery. And the Coors has their own private railroad spanning 5.5 miles from one end of their facility to the other. So the primary purpose of my railroad is to get freight to and from the brewery. You'll see later on that the brewery takes up a pretty large percentage of my layout. So, so when I was designing the layout, these are kind of my layout givens that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do 1980s. Is Denver to Golden. I specifically chose a pretty small section of track. So I knew I wanted to go from basically downtown Denver out to Golden. That's only 15 miles of real track. I've scaled it down to about 5 miles on my layout. So um, I wanted it to run on Digitrax because I've been using Digitrax for a long time. So it's an operations-based layout. It's multi-deck. I've tried to keep most of my aisles to at least 36 inches wide for people to get around. I wasn't always necessarily successful with that, but I tried. I tried to keep a minimum of 30-inch radiuses because I do run passenger cars. Excuse me. I wanted a minimum of number 6 switch, um, which I have pretty successfully done. I only have one area on the layout that has one smaller switch. So the big part of it is I wanted to reuse like my existing bench work because my whole layout is built on a modular framework. It's basically all 2 foot by 4 foot modules that are reused from previous layouts. So it was fairly quick to set the bench work up to get the layout built. And then the second thing is I have a lot of code 100 track and switches that my dad had on his layout. And you'll see later why I wanted to reuse a lot of that because as we know, switches are expensive and there's a lot on this layout. So the other part was I didn't want to grade over 2%. everything I was given here is a lot of them I failed on. So uh, there is a grade on the layout that hits 4% in one spot. So, but it's not on a main line. All the main line is less than 2%. And then the last thing, even though the line in real life wasn't signaled, I wanted a full block detection and signaling on the layout because I do enjoy operating signals. So when I went to design the layout, I did draw it in 2D and 3D CAD. One thing I didn't mention in my bio is I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, so I'd say I'm pretty good at CAD work, and it makes it easier for me. So again, the bench work is mostly 2 foot by 4 foot modules that I designed out. Um, and then one of the things I did is I used full-size templates to transfer my designs to the bench work. So, but here I'll show you the CAD models that I went through, and then the backdrops on the layout I'd made from masonite because it makes a nice flexible curve. But so, as I said, I did some 3D CAD work. That was most of the bench work for the layout. I wanted to design that out so I knew exactly what I had to build. So all the blue stuff is the masonite backdrops, but you can see I modeled out all the bench work for my room, as well as the room itself, to be able to make sure that everything was fitting the way I wanted it to. So, so I'm going to just quickly go through. So I have 3 levels on the layout. I have a staging level, I have my lower level, and then I have my upper level. So these are just kind of the basic track plans. I did all this work in a program called Xtract CAD. It's a free train CAD program. It has a little bit of a learning curve, as most CAD programs do, but it's actually very powerful because it has a lot of the features like turnouts already built into it, and it allows you to join tracks together and keep radiuses the way you want them. So I found, and it's free. That was the big part. I didn't want to pay for a program if I didn't have to. So, and it's constantly updated. I think they're on version 5.2 now. When I did this originally, it was like 4.0, so they've updated it since I did this track plan 8 years ago. So here's actually the details of how the layout came out. It's 3 levels. My main line's about 250 feet, but on the layout itself, there's almost 1,100 feet of track total. There's 125 turnouts on the layout. Again, for my givens, I didn't necessarily make it. I do have one section of track that has a 28-inch radius. Everything else is bigger than that. My helix, for example, is a 36-inch radius helix. It's a 3-turn helix. There's 6 major towns. There's one siding per town, number of spurs. I have over 40 industries on the layout, 3 classification yards, and 3 staging yards. So I'm a bit of an electronics nerd as well. So I like to build all my own control panels, and then I did set it up so that there are a number of different districts in the layout. There ended up being 11 different power districts within the layout, all protected by PSX circuit breakers. I do have 2 boosters and a command station that power the layout, so there's quite a bit of power. And then I also wanted to check what my current draw was on all my different command station boosters, so I added ramp meters so that I could tell how much power is coming out on that. Again, the layout is fully signaled, so I do have a block detection and signaling system. Block detection is done by a company called Railroad Circuits. The reason I like them is that it is a LocoNet compatible device, so I can plug it right into the Digitrack system and it works, and it sends the messages that I've either had a block occupied or not, and I can run that over LocoNet and see that on my computer quite easily. And then they use what it's called a current transformer to do the actual block detection versus a diode drop, so you don't get a voltage drop. So I did a bunch of research, and that was the one I found that worked best. So even though I have a Digitrack system, I am using third-party um, electronics that work with Digitracks, but not necessarily Digitracks branded. So for signaling, I did end up using Digitrack's SE8 decoder that runs all my signals. I have 2 of those on the layout that drives up to 64 signals. I don't have that many, but that's what it took to do it. And then I also use what's called an NC lighted decoder, and I'll talk about these a little bit later, to do what I call my maintainer call lights, and that's how I use um, how am able to have people contact the dispatcher. Layout controls, everything on my layout is push button controlled for the most part. I wanted to make it pretty easy. If you hit a button, it throws the turnout. You hit the same button again, it throws the turnout the other way. So there are also a bunch of caboose industry ground throws as well. For example, my main yard uses those. Um, and other areas that are very close to the fascia. The design of my layout is that nothing is deeper than about 30 inches. So everything is reachable. Again, with every layout, there's an exception to that, and I'll show you what that is later. But I did design my control panels in so that they're all kind of a standard size. They're either three by four, 3 by 6, or 3 by 8 inches. That just made it easy to standardize on the size, and I know what it was. Made it nice because I could 3D print these surroundings to protect the buttons. I learned that the hard way on an old layout. I was sweeping stuff and I set the broom up against the layout and accidentally hit it one time. The broom fell over and sheared off every single push button on my control panels. So that's why it has these protectors around them now, because I did not enjoy that and there was lots of expletives yelled at that time. So, um, as far as the artwork goes, I do that in PowerPoint. I don't have any CAD program that did that. That's just PowerPoint and drawing it and doing the different shapes within PowerPoint. Then I just print it out and laminate it between two pieces of either acrylic or polycarbonate. And then I just drill the holes right where the artwork is, right through it. And then put LEDs on the back and put the push buttons. They're really actually pretty simple to make. It takes me about an hour to make a control panel. The one thing I do limit to panels to is I don't usually have more than 5 push buttons on a panel, because more than that just seems to complicate it, and then people can't figure out which turnout they're trying to do. So I try to keep it as simple as I can on the panels so that they're easy to understand where you're going. So again, like here on the West Arvada, and the LEDs will tell you which way the turnout is set. So it's pretty easy. You hit the button for that turnout, it throws that turnout. Pretty simple. So again, I do use signals on the layout. Do two different types. I do have searchlight and I do have 3 color signals. Mostly just due to availability. Wasn't one choice or the other. If I do it again, I'd go to all searchlight signals, just because that was the majority what the Rio Grande used around the Denver area. So I do have a full-size CTC control panel. This was a fun project. Has 12 control points, but can control up to 33 of the mainline turnouts. Just to kind of explain how this panel works, I'm going to use this control point as an example. So the top switch here is actually what throws the turnout. These 2 indicators show which way the turnout is throwing. This is the signal indicator. So this sets the direction of the signal. Either you're moving left or sorry, you're moving to the left or you're moving to the right. And that's all the panel indicates. So this LED or this one will turn green if the signal's set. It doesn't actually show you what color the signal is on the layout. It just says, hey, you're set to go. So up here, this on the block diagram, all of these are the different blocks within the layout. As a train progresses, you can see like one right here is lit up. They'll show that a block is occupied uh, in that particular block. So I do have magnets that I stick on there to be able to track the different trains as they move along. Um, and then they have these direction indicators. This tells you on the single track main which way you have set up the signals to be able to run. So if you set up the signal to point right, this is going to set to right and say, hey, your train's trying to move right. Or if you move this one and change it to left, this one will switch to the left indicator and tell you that your train is moving left. So what kind of inspired me to build this dispatcher panel was a gentleman by the name of Dave Stewart in Colorado has a large 3,000 square foot layout, O-scale layout called the Appalachian in Ohio in his basement. And he has a dispatch panel that's even larger than this one. And it really inspired me to build this one. And he got help from a gentleman named Bob Sobel. And Bob Sobel's kind of a genius when it comes to dispatching panels. He helped Dave build his panel, but he went through so far as to make sure that all the bezels on all the lights and everything were actually made to US&S standards. So it's a beautiful panel. Um, he did an amazing job, and he helped me quite a bit with the technical knowledge on how to build this. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like on the backside. Oops, sorry. This is me as I'm trying to build it. It took me about 3 months to build the dispatcher panel, and you can see there's quite a bit of wiring on here. So every LED on the panel is individually addressable. So there's over 300 outputs on this panel. Um, so I needed a way to be able to do that as efficiently, and that's what these black boxes are. They're called TC64s, which are basically an input-output device to LocoNet. So it basically sends a message over LocoNet that says, hey, this sensor's on or off, and they're fully programmable to be able to tell them what to do with that. So with that, all of it is driven by JMRI's Panel Pro, and there's a lot of programming that went into it to be able to make all this work. I am by no means a coder of any kind. It is all visually done. It's actually pretty straightforward, surprisingly. It's all if-then statements. So if this happens, do this. And that's all what it's built on. There's just for my panel, there's about 1,000 of those conditions that you had to go through. So, and it's taken me quite a while. I'm on version 19 of my code for this. So I've been developing it. And again, this is my third layout that I've done this on. So I've learned quite a bit over the years trying to do it. If anybody ever wants to delve into it, I'm perfectly willing to go through it with you. I'm actually working with another member of our group called Kevin Wills on his dispatch panel because he's trying to build one too. So, um, excuse me. So this is actually what the panel looks like on the computer because I built this first before I ever built the physical panel. So I can actually computer dispatch as well. But I really like the idea of being able to flip a switch on my panel itself and have it control the layout. I'm even though I'm doing fairly modern, I still like the old feel of rotary switches to be able to set everything. So it's just to me, it's more fun than clicking on a computer. So um, I enjoy that a lot more. So um, let me get back to that. So these are actually what the components look like that make up the majority of the panel. Again, the black box I was telling you about, this is again another product by Railroad Circuits. It's the output device I was talking about. And then I had to make some custom made circuit boards. So this whiteboard and the blackboard I designed in a program called Eagle. So it's an electrical CAD program. So figuring out how that to make sure all the LEDs knew where they were getting mounted, the rotary switches where they were going, and then making sure I actually had points to be able to mount it to the back of the panel as well. So um, again, like I said, I'm kind of an electronics nerd, so I kind of enjoy making things like these circuit boards to be able to make the panels possible. So additionally, I was talking about the layout. I do have a phone system on the layout too. This is so the dispatcher and the train crews can actually communicate with each other. I have a hard time with radios. I have a hard time focusing when I have something blaring in my ear all the time. So I tried that initially with my layout, and I wasn't enjoying it. My operators weren't enjoying it. So I was like, okay, let's try something else. So I went down to Texas for the national convention, and I noticed that a couple of layouts they had these phones around. So I asked them about it, and they had these PABX phone boxes. It has 8 extensions on it. They're available on Amazon for about $80, and it works just like having a phone system. So you just dial an extension, and it rings the phone. It's really easy. I mean, it's plug and play for the phones. You plug a phone cable into it, and then you hook a phone up to it, and that's it. There's no programming involved. It's really simple. So, and the nice thing is one of the extensions you hit zero, and it dials the operator, in this case, the dispatcher. So it makes it really easy. So on the dispatcher phone, you dial zero, it's easy to get hold of anybody. So, and that seems to work really well, which brings me to the next thing that I do. I have what we call maintainer call lights. So at every signal location, there's this little blue blinky light here on top of the shed that the dispatcher can turn on from the dispatcher panel. It'll start blinking blue at you and let you know that the dispatcher is trying to get a hold of you. And that's usually because you have a red signal ahead of you and he's trying to contact you to figure out what he's trying to do. Either you need to clear the siding and let a train by, or he's trying to get some information for you. So that seems to work out, and they'll call the dispatcher, and that's his feedback to tell him to call you. Or he doesn't really know where you, I mean, he knows where you're at, but he doesn't necessarily have a radio communication with you. So that's my way of maintaining communication with the crews on my particular layout. So operations, typically I run about 17 different trains during an op session. I have 4 fixed positions within the layout, so we have the North Yard Master, the Golden Yard Master, and then the Coors Yard, Coors Brewery Facility, which has two people, and it keeps 2 people busy for a full session. So it kind of gives you the size of the scope of the Coors Brewery. So I do use train orders and car cars and waybills, as well as train orders. So one of the things I do is all my locomotive sets are multiple units. So I needed to come up with a way to be able to tell you what the information on each of those consists were. And unfortunately, the one drawback that I hate about Digitrax and I like a lot about NCE is that you can select any locomotive in an NCE consist, and it brings up the whole consist. Well, Digitrax doesn't let you do that. It has to be the top locomotive. And that drove me nuts because it was always like, okay, is it the first engine? Is it the second engine? Is it the third engine? Which one is it? So I finally got tired of it, and then I went to operate at John Parker's layout in Colorado, and he had these locomotive cards. And so what it is basically he set all his locomotives up as this advanced consist. So you select this address, not the locomotive address, but this address, and it pulls up your locomotives and they run beautifully. So it just made it an easier way for me to be able to tell, okay, this set of locomotives is this one address, and you don't have to deal with it. So, and it tells you all the different functions that you have on your locomotive. What's your lights, your bell, your horn, etc. And then I wanted to make it really obvious which road you were picking up. So obviously the Rio Grande locomotives get the Rio Grande symbol. The Burlington Northerns get the big green BN logo. So it's just a nice visual indicator of which locomotive you're getting. And then the basic things of, okay, this is how much horsepower you have on the front of your train. It was not necessarily useful for operations, but a nice to know type situation. So train orders. While not necessarily prototypically accurate, I've color coded all my layout locations, and I tell you what your train is and um, your train number, what power you have, how many cars you have, where you're starting out, what work you're doing, and where you're going to end up. And then each of those locations is color coordinated, and those all match my car cards. So if you're going to a particular location, like Fairmont, for example, all the cars that are destined for that location are going to match your train orders to tell you if you have work there or not. So I did color code all my towns. This is actually something I learned from Burr, um, going through trying to make it a color gradation from hot to cold. So kind of make it easy. If you're going towards the cold side, you're heading south. If you're going to the hot side, or sorry, if you're going to hot, you're heading south. Cold, you're heading north. So didn't necessarily know if it worked out, but I think it was a great idea. So, and I copy great ideas. So, and I try to give credit where credit's due. So thank you, Burr. So again, talk about car cards. So I found a gentleman online that had come up with an Excel-based way of doing car cards. So every one of my car cards is got all the locomotive or the reporting marks, the car number, what type of car it is, what color it is, how long, and any weird notes about it. So, and then the waybill itself is just gets inserted into that car card. So I don't know if you guys can see it on my camera, but there's one of my car cards. I do laminate them all. The reason I laminate them is I found that over time tape rips, but the lamination seems to be holding up really well. So it took a while to do all that because I have about 300 cars on the layout, but going through it seems to make the cards last a long time. And then the waybills, they just get stuffed into those. Those are just paper because those get changed out all the time. But I don't know if any of you guys noticed, but the lading on my waybill here was that it was dog food, but it was also hazardous. So, but just a little joke that guys notice sometimes when I have my orientations. So I'm gonna give the system map and then we'll actually get to some photos of the layout and give you the actual tour of the layout. So beginning of the layouts to kind of starts at Union Station, so that's mile marker 0, and then it works from basically from right to left on the diagram here. I do have a branch line that goes out to Commerce City and Brighton. In the real life railroad, that would actually be the Rio Grande Main Line. In this particular case, it's a branch line on my railroad. I had to take a little creative license with that on my railroad. And then so that's north and that's south. South goes down to a staging yard. Have a number of trains that come out of there for operations. And then we start heading west to the towns of Arvada, Fairmont, and Golden, and then finally Coors. You can see Coors does take up a pretty substantial part of my railroad. Um, so basically there's 4 different railroads, excuse me, that operate. I have 3 of them shown, the Rio Grande, the Burlington Northern, Coors, and then I have my home road, which is the Colorado Front Range Railroad, which their job basically is to do all the local traffic. So switching all the local industries, then bringing back to North Yard. So BN and the Rio Grande do all the manifest trains. So anything that transfers from North Yard, to example, to Golden Yard, that would be done by a BN um, train crew. And then another example is anything that's going to Brighton Staging or to Commerce City would be done by Rio Grande locomotives. So starting out, Union Station. Again, this is one of those buildings. Like I said, I like to do prototype buildings as much as I can, as space allows. Union Station's one building I really wanted to have on the layout. Unfortunately, I didn't have the space to do the full depth of the building, so I built a facade. The building is fully lit. It took me almost a full year to actually construct the building. I have over 650 hours into this building. 200 of it of CAD time, or no, sorry, 400 of it in CAD, and then about 250 hours of actual construction time to build this particular building. So the building itself is about 6 feet long. It is fully lit. The one thing I still have to do, I haven't finished on it, is I haven't finished the interior lighting on the center section yet. But the whole sign is lit. That took a long time. So in this little section right here, believe it or not, there's about 250 LEDs. So in just the sign and the clock. So um, I know I can't zoom in on it, but the time, if you look at it closely, is 10:04 p.m., which is the time that the lightning struck the clock tower in Back to the Future. So it's one of my favorite movies, so I just figured I'd throw that in as a detail, so see if people noticed it. So moving on, same kind of area is the United States Post Office Annex building. Unfortunately, this building has already been torn down and no longer exists, so I had to do a bunch of research to find photos of it. It really was this ugly yellow brick color. Um, so unfortunately, I wasn't able to model the whole building, but I did get away with it because I put a mirror here to be able to extend it. So this is actually just a mirror image of this. If you look at the lettering, you can see that it's backwards. So, but it was one way I could get the look of the full building in without actually having to build the full building. So this was another building that is present in downtown. It's still here to this day. It was a refrigerated warehouse. It's now been turned into lofts, but the nice thing is the look of the building hasn't changed, so I was able to get some really good photographs of it. This particular, I forgot to mention that all these buildings that I've been showing you are laser cut and completely scratch built. So I do have a laser cutter that I spend a lot of time drafting and doing CAD work on, and then I throw it on the laser and it engraves all this. So, for example, all the bricks on here were completely engraved on my laser. All the window frames, I designed them and cut them out. The letters. So this particular building, all the bricks are completely hand painted. It took me quite a while just to sit there with a little brush and paint every brick on this building. So that's not the bricks are engraved, but I have to go through and paint them all. So, but again, this I have a thing about lighting. As I've been building lightings, I've discovered it's easier to just build the lighting in as I go rather than try to retrofit it later. So this building is fully lit as well. I haven't hooked it up yet, which is why I don't have it shown um, with the lights on yet. So, so moving on, North Yard is my main yard for the layout. It's technically a 10-track yard. There's 8 classification tracks and 2 arrival departure tracks. As I mentioned before, I do have some Caboose Industries round throws, but one of the things I did is that I put them all at the very front of the layout so that you're not having to reach in to try to reach the switch and potentially hit a locomotive because I spend a lot of time trying to make my locomotives detailed, and I really don't want them to get hit and broken. So I put tubes underneath the tracks here that correspond to the location of each switch so that all the switch throws are up front here. And then I do have magnets on each track for magnetic uncoupling. Um, so far, everybody that's from the yard is like that. It does take a little bit of planning to be able to do that because I basically had to take a router and come in and route channels in here and put a tube in, so it's got a long wire that goes through to be able to actuate those turnouts. So Burnham Shops is the next location. So Burnham Shops was the main maintenance facility for the Rio Grande. That's where they had all their heavy maintenance. They didn't send out anything; they did it all themselves. And the Burnham Shops just closed about 5 years ago. So um, Union Pacific decided to move all their maintenance to Little Rock, Arkansas. So, but it was one of the largest maintenance facilities in the western half of the United States. So they did have a turntable that was still there. It only got removed, like I said, a couple years ago. I think it got sent to, I want to say the Illinois Railroad Museum, where I think it's on permanent display there. So they are actually trying to put it back into service. So with that, kind of the main purpose of the shops is for locomotive servicing. It's also where I store my passenger cars that are not necessarily in service. Um, for example, the Zephyr cars here actually do get pulled out. They get taken over to Union Station. Nothing is actually stored at the station. So you have to come build your passenger train at the station, get your passengers, and then take the train out. So it actually makes passengers operations a little bit more fun because you actually have to switch your passenger train as well. So this is the other look in the other direction of the same facility, just so you can see where it goes. Um, we were talking about car card boxes earlier. I do laser cut all my car card boxes and assemble them, and then they just get painted with a flat uh, spray paint just to kind of get a finished look on them. So the words on all of them are engraved by the laser. So, and then I take a black Sharpie and fill it in just to give it some definition so it's easy to read them. Moving on, the next place you'll see on the layout is what I call Foss Creek Canyon. I'm still working on the plaster on it. This is really my first major attempt at rock work. I've never really done too much in terms of scenery on layouts before because I've always moved. So this is the farthest I've ever gotten on a layout. So a little history behind this thing is this particular bridge here came off a layout in Colorado. He was a good friend of mine named Terry Godwin. When I was a kid, probably about 10 years old, he let me come over and actually operate trains like a normal operating session. But for a 10-year-old, that was a huge thing, especially since Terry wasn't one usually that liked kids too much. He actually was let me come over and operate trains. So when he decided to tear his layout down, he asked everybody to come over and say, "Hey, take the parts you wanted to lay out, they're for yours." And so I got one of the bridges from his layout, so I wanted to find a way to include that in my layout. So it's known as the Godwin Memorial Trestles, and I thank Terry every day because he really is the one that got me into operations. Even though he wasn't big on kids, he let me come over and run trains. So I thank him profusely for that. But going back to this scene, as you guys have noticed, I like some of the newer fabricating techniques. The dam here, for example, is completely 3D printed. So I printed that on a filament printer. Nice thing about filament printers, they do concrete really nicely. They got the little fill lines and it works out really well. So, and then this bridge came off my old layout. I had a swing gate that I had a bridge going over it. So I was like, okay, because that spring gate, the bridge was on a swing gate, I wanted to have something that was a little bit more sturdy than a plastic bridge. So that's actually a brass bridge, because I wanted the rigidity of brass over plastic. I have Central Valley bridges. I built them up, but they weren't as rigid as I'd like. So I wanted to find a place to be able to reuse that bridge, and that's where it ended up. So, um, moving on to the next town, the town of South Platte. This is kind of the major switching location on the layout. There is 11 industries within South Platte. It's also a junction, between the main line and the branch line. So, not that you can really see it right here, but there's a switch right here, and then this front track right here that actually goes down to the branch line, and the main line comes back here and goes into this little mountain right here, which goes into the helix. So South Platte's, like I said, one of the largest switching industries on the layout. It has a local train that's dedicated to it. Takes approximately an hour just to switch this town, to go out, switch it, and head back to the yard. So one of the main industries is Denver Steak and Dairy. This is just a Walther's kit that I put together. But the stockyards took me about 3 months to build. So, and they're based off of the Rio Grande's prototype plans for stockyards. So I based them off the main stockyards that they have near, now near just north of Denver. They have a whole complex called the Stock Show Complex, and there's the rodeo there every year, and they have a big stock show that every year in Denver at this particular location. So I wanted to kind of model that on the railroad. So, speaking of which, I'm not nearly anywhere near done with scenery on my layout. This is still very much the plywood Pacific. I'm only about 25% done with scenery, so I got a long way to go. But scenery is one place I'm really looking to learn on because I've never really done much of it. Again, like I said, I moved a lot, never got really to the scenery part. So I'm learning. And yeah, so, oh, sorry. Next town, I was talking about scenery. This is kind of one of my first attempts at scenery on the layout. This is right as you come down my stairs, one of the first things you see. So coming out of the tunnel, this is the other end of the helix. There's a 3-turn helix between South Platte and Arvada, and this is where that helix comes out. So look in the other direction of Arvada. Colorado actually is a very high altitude desert, so there's not a lot of trees. And where there are trees, it's usually because there's water. So up in the mountains, there's a bunch of evergreens, but from the Front Range, which is where I'm modeling, most of the trees are cottonwood trees. And like I said, they're near artificial water sources. So eventually along this line here, there'll be actually a bunch of residential houses, and there'll be fences, like the back fence of it, and then there'll be some cottonwood trees along there. I just haven't gotten to that part yet. So, um, the other end of the Arvada will be a town. So this will actually be blocked out and have roads. And I'm working on building a gas station for it right now. But this white grain elevator, there actually is again, white grain elevator in Arvada. There's not a lot of industry there. That's why there's only 2 industries in Arvada. But again, I'm trying to model particular industries as they were on the railroad. So again, like I said, I like to model prototype locations. So this bridge is something I'm always drove under all the time in Colorado. It's still here. It's still one of the few bridges that actually still says Rio Grande on it. And so I really wanted to have that. I had this bridge on my whole layout and I wanted to model it. So this is the real bridge and this is my model of it. I think it came out pretty well. And eventually I'll take this backdrop here that I found and I'll paste it in there so it actually looks like it's going through. Um, One thing you'll note, the road is wider here, but this is a more modern photo. In the 80s, when I'm modeling, it really was just a 2-lane road. So that's why there's the difference in the road there. So moving on, this is again, another industry on the layout is called International Paper. Again, another real industry on the railroad. And then not shown is an industry called Jolly Rancher. Jolly Rancher was actually started in Colorado, but about the time I was in middle school, it got bought by Hershey and moved to Pennsylvania. But I mean, it was 2 blocks from my middle school that I went to, so we knew what flavor they were making of Jolly Rancher every day because we could smell it. So it's just that was kind of an important, industry I wanted to have on my layout. Even though it wasn't rail served, I wanted it because it was something that I remember from my childhood growing up, that Jolly Rancher was always there. So my favorite days they made were either the fire Jolly Ranchers, the grape Jolly Ranchers, because you could smell the cinnamon, you could smell the grape. So, um, so this is the International Paper is part of the town of Fairmont. So this is actually, you come into my house, as you're looking down the stairs, you'll see this town. Most of the town, it's only 7 inches wide on the actual track work, but try to make it focused on that. So this is what the rest of Fairmont looks like. It does widen up here, which was actually unintentional. I had to do that because of where the foundation was in the house. So if you see these boxes underneath my layout here, that's my foundation to my house. I discovered the hard way that if I put the tunnel portal right here, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, that if I put it there, it would run into my foundation on the other side of my stairs. So I had to move the layout out about 6 more inches to be able to get the tunnel to go through and poke out on the other side of my stairs. So, uh, again, Burr, thank you for the idea. I got the idea of going through my stairs from you. My wife didn't particularly appreciate that, but, I did. It extended my railroad significantly. So, um, it it added about 50 feet of run by putting the layout through the stairs versus if I had just had to stop here. So, so again, being a bit of an electronics nerd, one of my things I like to do is a little bit of animation. So I have a little video here to show. I do have a working set of crossing gates on my layout that have worked with a little optical sensor. So when a train goes by, the gates will drop, and then when it clears, they'll go back up. So, so again, another kind of iconic bridge. This is a flyover bridge. On the real one, this is actually a railroad bridge. The railroad tracks go over the road in this case. So this is called Highway 58, which is kind of the main highway entrance into Golden. So I wanted to have that on my layout to kind of show, hey, this is the entrance to Golden. So this is my modeled version of it. I did have to make some, excuse me, minor changes. You can see that the real ones were straight. I had to angle mine just a little bit just because of how my track work is, but I think it captured the essence of what this bridge actually looked like. So, um, just as an overall shot, behind you, the whole upper level that you can see here is the town of Golden. So Golden is a very large town on my layout. I did try to model the track work within Golden pretty accurately as to what they have on the railroad, other than it wrapping around. But with that does come with this inherent challenges when it comes to operations. Golden is probably the most difficult yard to operate on my railroad, just because there is a lot of traffic and not a lot of room. So um, you could probably ask a couple of guys that have been the Golden Yard Master. It's not an easy position, but I think everybody's had fun with it. Um, so this is the west end of the Golden siding. So the siding ends right here. And then where this train is going up right here, you can see this. This is what is my interchange track to Coors. So there's a property line here. Basically, um, Coors locomotives are not allowed on BN property, and BN locomotives are not allowed on Coors property. So every time they interchange, they have to shove cars on this track to be able to interchange those cars because Coors is private property. So, and then we get into Golden Yard. Again, not a very big yard. It's only a 3-track yard, but there it can hold about 40 cars in this little tiny yard. So surprisingly. But the nice thing is the interchange track is nice and long, and they can store as many cars as you want. You can fit 40 cars on the interchange track. So not that we've ever actually put that many on there. We usually do only about 20 at a time. So, and then the last part of Golden is the what I call the West Golden Industries. There's 2 industries that go here. If Purina Chow is just a distributor, and then at the end, there's a company called Coors Ceramics. Coors Ceramics is a technology company owned by Coors, well, formerly owned by Coors. Um, and their main claim to fame that most people don't realize is they're the ones that developed the tiles for the space shuttle. So, so I have a lot of DoD traffic that comes in and out of Coors for that reason because they are a DoD contractor. Uh, when Molson and Coors merged, they had to actually separate off Coors Ceramics and they renamed it Coors Tech because it was a government contractor and they couldn't be owned by a foreign entity. In his case, Molson was a Canadian company, so they had to spin it off. So a little background history to that. So Coors Ceramics is at the end of the line. It's again an industry I haven't built the building for yet, so I have a little placeholder sign you can see here at the end. So this backtrack here, that is the interchange track that goes up to Coors. So it's a really long track. So the Coors switchers have to come down here, pick up cars, and take them all the way back over the interchange track. So here we get to the beginning of Coors. Like I said, Coors is one of the biggest industries on my layout. It takes up about half of the upper level. Um, these two large buildings here are actually the back sides of the buildings. The actual front side of the building is on the other side of the wall here. I did that to kind of simulate how big these buildings in Coors are. I mean, they're absolutely massive. And to give you an idea, this building here is almost 4 feet long. So they're really big buildings. I don't know if you can notice it, but there's some specialty hoppers here. So Coors had some interesting hopper cars that they use to transfer grain from one of their grain elevators to their other grain elevator. And so they built these specialty chutes on the top of them. And what they did is those chutes were used to fill the cars from this grain elevator and take them to the other one in their main complex. And they actually have a connection on the bottom that automatically unloads the car as they need it. So they'll load up the car, they'll take another one and unload it as they're creating the part of the brewing process. So I have built about 6 of these specialty cars, and they do train transfers back and forth between the 2 grain elevators, so. This is the other end of that same area. This is what I call the receiving area, because this grain elevator receives the inbound grain that comes in from the rest of the layout, and from there, it gets transferred to the main complex. This is the engine facility, and right in front of it will be the fuel depot to power the switchers. So I have 2 sets of switchers. This is one set. These 2 locomotives are permanently coupled together. And then I have another switcher that's in the yard, which I will show you here in a minute. So this is what I call the distribution location within Coors. So this is one of the warehouses. The reason there's this bridge here is actually in the middle of Coors, the Clear Creek runs through the middle of the brewery. And so they have a bridge that actually crosses over Clear Creek that is a truss bridge, just like this one. So I tried to show that on my layout as the bridge crossing Clear Creek. So this is the overall view of the Coors Brewery. I don't have all the buildings quite finished yet because they are massive and they take a while to build. So um, from here to here is actually almost 6 feet across. That was one location where I had to get away where I couldn't do the 30-inch reach that I like to do. Again, there's more of these specialty type transfer hoppers. Uh, Fairly large grain elevator. This building's about 2 feet long to give you a sense of scale. The power plant here, Coors has their own power plant. Well, they've sold it off. They no longer own it. But it was a coal-fired power plant, and they used coal that came down from the Craig branch on the Rio Grande. So I have Rio Grande hoppers that prototypically came from up in the mountains down to the Coors power generation plant. So this particular building is the unloading building that actually unloads the coal hoppers. So I like my animation project. So what I'm working on currently is I have an automatic unloader. All my cars have magnetic loads in them, so they look like this. I don't know if you guys can see it on the camera, but they have these loads I 3D printed, but they have a steel bar inside of them, so a magnet can lift them up and pull them out of the car. So part of the operations of Coors is that you're required to unload the coal train. So there's 18 cars you have to go unload from the coal train, and then you send it back out light. So, so this part of the railroad handles mostly hoppers. This one handles coal hoppers, and then over here on this lower section is tank car loading. So one of the other things that Coors did is they load what they call beer concentrate or wort into tank cars. And what they did is ship that out east, and they had a bottling plant on the East Coast, and they would take that concentrate, take it out to the East Coast, bottle it out there, and sell Coors on the East Coast. So unfortunately, all that track work was recently ripped up right around 2022, I think. And now they just ship it all by mechanical reefer boxcar because Coors does not pasteurize their beer, so it has to stay cold all the time. So, um, lastly is the Coors Yard. I built this not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before that, in my main workroom, which is where I'm sitting right now. If you look up on my shoulder, it's right here, next to me. So this is the main yard for Coors. It's just a little 3-track yard, but there's a number of switching industries within the yard. So you have the processing or the packaging plant, you have the canning plant, and then you have the glass plant. The glass plant is this building back here. That's Coors makes all their own glass bottles. So that's and they make their own cans. In fact, Coors, another interesting fact about them is they are the inventor of the aluminum can, the aluminum beer can. So um, everybody else has copied the can after them, but they are the original producers of aluminum cans. So going on from there, on the branch line is Commerce City. Commerce City is a real town. The biggest thing that goes on in Commerce City is there's a large refinery in Commerce City. Um, I talked previously that I'm a mechanical engineer. I actually work in the oil and gas field. So one of the things I wanted to show was a pipeline being laid. So because most of what I do is pipeline inspection work. So I wanted to have that somewhere on my layout of them actually laying down a new pipeline. If you guys ever come over, you can look at this little welding shack. It actually has a little welder inside of it that lights up, and you can see the guy welding on the pipeline. I mean, he's got to be the world's slowest welder, though, because he's been welding that same section of pipe for about 3 years now. So, but another major industry is a scrapyard. A good family friend of mine worked in a scrapyard in Denver, doing recycled metal, precious metals. So he did silver and gold. So I wanted to have a scrapyard showing what he did on the layout. So if I'm not modeling a prototype industry, it's usually an industry or feature of someone that's helped me out in my hobby of railroading. So again, because I work in the petrochemical industry, I wanted to have a refinery that was somewhat accurate. So going along here, you have your tank car loading. This was just a Walther's kit, but they did a pretty good job of it. And then the tanks. One of the things I wanted to show was a number of pipelines going along, above ground pipelines. And how I did this was actually I used 14 gauge wire that I just straightened out, and just the different colors of wire is what each pipeline was. And that particular size comes out to be about an 8-inch pipeline, which is pretty accurate of what they use in the actual industries. So here's overall what my refinery looks like. Almost 80% of this is probably scratch built. There are a couple Walther's kits thrown in here and there, but I tried to separate them out so they didn't actually look like the Walther's kit. So for example, this is the Walther's kit back here, and then these two furnaces are also part of the Walther's kit. But every other structure in here was scratch built. One of the things I did do though to kind of make the refinery look bigger is the backdrop here. I found photorealistic photos of refineries, and I cut them out and I glued them to the backdrop to kind of give them a sense of depth. So for example, these are all just photos right here. This is another photo that's glued to the backdrop, and so is this, just to give it some depth. So I don't have a photo of it shown right now, but the whole facility is also lit. There's over 180 LEDs lighting up this whole facility. So eventually I'll have it so that I can have a night operations and have all my buildings lit up at night. But that's a down the road type project. So what's next? So I originally wanted to move my dispatcher panel downstairs underneath my stairs, but unfortunately I found out that this wall right here is structural. So I kind of had to scrap that plan because the bid from my contractor uh, to change that was in the 5-figure range, and I'm not willing to pay that much to modify that. So I decided to expand the railroad. So in this case, you can see from the CAD plan up here, this is where the stairs are. This is where I wanted to put my dispatcher panel, but that didn't happen. So it's like, okay, let's expand the railroad. So I built another reverse loop here. And what that allows me to do is that allows me to have a loop-to-loop operation for open houses, but it also makes turning my passenger trains easier. Because right now, for example, my Rio Grande Zephyr, you have to turn every car on the turntable, and it's not fun. So this allows you to turn the whole train on a reverse loop versus having to turn it on a turntable. So I'm trying to get that functioning. I've got the backdrops in, I've got the lighting in, but it's not quite ready to run yet. So, and that's the end of the tour. So.
With your train instruction cards, what software did you make them in? Was that PowerPoint or Word or what?
It was Excel.
Excel.
So,
Okay.
yep. So, yeah, all my train orders I just did in Excel. I just typed them up. I found a format that I kind of liked, and then I just copied and pasted after that, and just updated the instructions in Excel.
One of the things, excuse me, that I found fascinating is that you can move your control panel wherever you want around the house. And typically our control panels are nothing but a gaggle of wires that you couldn't move if you wanted to. So could you just say a few words about how you achieve that? I think you're using some newer technology that
Yeah,
many
let
of
me, let me share my screen again, and I'll
yeah,
pull that up here. Well, do you see these black boxes here
yes.
on the bottom? So what those are is those are an interface to LocoNet. So what I did is I tethered all of them together, basically daisy chained them, and then it goes into a splitter that I made here, and that LocoNet connection is just one phone cable that goes into it. So that's how I'm able to move it around pretty easily. So literally, just like you would plug in a throttle to your LocoNet network, I'm able to do the same thing with my dispatcher panel. So that was one of the things I knew I was gonna have to move it around pretty easily. So when I designed it, it's like, okay, I wanted to have one connection to the layout, and that's what it is via one single LocoNet cable, which looks just like a phone cable. And then I have a power supply for power to power it, and that's it. So it makes it really easy to move around.
Do you have operating sessions? If
Yes,
so,
sir, I do.
how many people at a time? How long do you
So
run?
typically, an operating session, I've had anywhere from 7 people to 12 people, but I found that 9 is kind of the optimal number, and that's including a dispatcher. So, and that's not including me. That's at 9 additional people. So that seems to be the number that's worked best so far. Um, that way, people don't get bored. Because one of the issues I had, and this took me a while to figure out, was how to load balance everything so that people weren't standing around. In my first couple of sessions, I unfortunately had people standing around. I felt like they were getting bored. So I reworked some of my train orders. I cut some trains down, made them shorter. And that way it was easier to make everybody so that they weren't standing around for long periods of time. So
And how long does a session last?
typically it's about 4 hours right now. So 4 to 5 hours is a typical session.
And how often?
I've been doing them once a month since about October last year. But that was a lot of that was to do because Sound Rail's coming up and I'm hosting for the first time on Sound Rail. And I wanted to work out a lot of the bugs in that. I think I'm going to take a break this summer after Sound Rail. Just because once a month is a lot. It takes a lot to set it up and get it ready. And I think I might go to after that about every other month. So
Thank you.
going forward after Sound Rail. So. But yeah, we usually end up running about 17 trains overall. So usually about half of those are actually locals, so they take a while. So for example, what I call my golden turn. So that goes, let me go back up here. And so the golden turn starts at North Yard, goes up to Golden, and then it comes all the way back to North Yard, switching Golden, Fairmont, and Urbana. That one usually takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to do that local. So it's one of the longest trains. But other trains sometimes just take 30 minutes. It depends on what train you're running. So
On that grade crossing that you showed, how did you power that, and what are the detectors? How many detectors?
So I have 3 detectors on it. Let me go back to that quick. That is this right here. So the logic that runs it is a little Arduino Nano that are programmed up. So it has 3 sensors on it. They're all optical sensors right now. So there's one in this tunnel portal on the left-hand side, and there's 2 on the right-hand side because I have a switch that diverts into the siding there. I am currently working on changing that to a current detector because I found that the optical ones, if a train gets in between 2 of them, the gates will come back up. But I do have resistor wheel sets on every single one of my cars for the block detection system. So I think a current detector is actually going to work better. I just haven't quite implemented it yet. So what actually drives the gates though are servos. I have 1 servo in each one that makes the gate go up and down. The signals themselves are NJ International, commercially made crossing gates. So
Thank you very much, Chuck. This presentation will be recorded and posted on the 4DPNR YouTube channel. And if any of you would like to give a layout tour, please let me or Lee Marsh know about it, and we'll get you scheduled.